The Arizona sun doesn't just shine, it judges. And on the day the wagon train burned, it found everyone guilty. Miranda Blake felt the heat searing her skin long before the flames ever touched the canvas. One moment, she was arguing with her father about scripture. The next, the air was filled with gunpowder and screams. Lieutenant Thornton, the man who promised protection, had instead delivered damnation. Now, bound and thrown over a horse, her world had shrunk to the smell of sweat, leather, and the iron grip of the Apache war chief who had just claimed her as his prize. She thought her life was over, but it was just the beginning of an ordeal that would forge her into something, or someone, entirely new. The dust of the Arizona Territory was a living thing. It coated the tongue, stung the eyes, and settled over the canvas-topped wagons of the small train like a burial shroud. Miranda Blake, daughter of Pastor Robert Blake, believed she had been prepared for the West. She had read the pamphlets. She had prayed for fortitude. She had not, however, been prepared for Lieutenant Miles Thornton. Thornton, assigned to escort their modest train, rode his horse with a ramrod-straight posture that seemed to defy the oppressive heat. He was a man of sharp, clean angles, from his pressed blue uniform to the clipped, arrogant way he spoke. He had known Miranda back in Ohio, had courted her with a cold intensity she found repulsive. Her refusal had been polite but firm. Seeing him at Fort McDowell, assigned as their protector, felt like a cruel joke from a silent god. "You see, Miss Blake," Thornton said, riding beside her wagon, his voice a low drawl that didn't carry to her father inside. "This land requires a firm hand. These natives only understand strength." "They are people, Lieutenant," Miranda said, her knuckles white on the wagon seat. "The Chiricahua, the Tonto, they are families." Thornton let out a short, barking laugh. "They are obstacles, Miranda, and I am the man who clears the path." Her father, Robert, a man whose faith was as wide as the plains, but as gentle as a breeze, leaned out. "Lieutenant, the good Lord provides for all. We are guests in this land." "We are conquerors, Pastor," Thornton corrected, his eyes glinting, "and today I intend to prove it." He spurred his horse forward, rallying his small detachment of 10 soldiers. "Scouts reported movement near the Gila River crossing. We'll ride ahead. Pacify the area." "Wait," Miranda called out. "That's not the agreement. You're supposed to stay with the wagons." But Thornton was already a cloud of dust, his men fanning out, rifles drawn. Pastor Robert shook his head, his face etched with worry. That man's pride will be his ruin. The ruin came an hour later. It didn't start with a war cry. It started with a single sharp crack, a rifle shot that was distinctly not military issue. Then, a volley. The wagon train ground to a halt. The civilians, mostly families seeking new lives, scrambled for a defense they didn't have. Then, Thornton and his men came galloping back, not in victory, but in a frantic, disorganized retreat. "Ambush!" Thornton bellowed, his face pale beneath the grime. They were waiting. Form a circle. But they weren't just waiting. Thornton had, as Miranda later learned, ridden directly into a sacred parley between 3 small bands and opened fire. He had mistaken a peace talk for a war council. Now, the consequence was upon them. Warriors seemed to rise from the earth itself. They were not the screaming, painted caricatures from the dime novels. They were focused, efficient, and silent. Horses wheeled, arrows hissed, and the air filled with the terror of the families. Miranda grabbed her father's old hunting rifle, her hands shaking. It was chaos. Thornton, rather than organizing a defense, was focused on Miranda. "Get to me! I'll protect you!" But as he fought his way toward her, A massive warrior, taller than the others, emerged from the smoke. His face was a mask of cold fury, his movements precise. This was not a brave. This was a leader. This was Garrick. He ignored Thornton, his eyes locking on the wagons. He saw the civilians, the families. He raised his hand, and the attack shifted. His warriors stopped firing on the wagons and focused entirely on the blue-coated soldiers who had slaughtered their peace delegates. Thornton, seeing his men overwhelmed, saw his chance. He wasn't trying to save the train. He was trying to save her. He spurred his horse, grabbed Miranda's arm and tried to pull her up. "No, my father!" she screamed, fighting him. Pastor Robert was trying to help a fallen woman, her son crying beside her. "Go, Miranda! Live!" A stray bullet, fired by one of Thornton's panicking troopers, struck Pastor Robert in the chest. He looked at Miranda, his eyes wide with surprise, before collapsing. "Father, no!" Her scream was primal. The world went red. She raised the rifle and fired, not at the Apache, but at the sky, at God, at the man who had caused this. In that moment of grief-stricken madness, Thornton was ripped from his horse by two warriors. But Garrick was staring at her. He saw her, not as a prize, but as the eye of the storm. He dismounted in one fluid motion. Miranda was on her knees, trying to reach her father's body, but the fighting was too thick. Garrick grabbed her. She fought, pounding on his chest, but it was like striking granite. He said nothing. He simply lifted her, threw her over the back of his horse, and mounted behind her. He let out a single, sharp cry. The attack ceased. His warriors, their point made, their revenge taken on the soldiers, melted back into the landscape, taking their dead and wounded. Lieutenant Miles Thornton was left alive, disarmed, on his knees, watching his entire command destroyed, and the woman he coveted carried away. Garrick, looking back at him, offered no expression. He simply turned his horse toward the mountains. Miranda Blake's world went dark, the rhythm of the horse's gallop, the only proof that she was still alive. Her father was dead. She was a captive, and the man whose arm felt like a steel band around her waist was the most terrifying, powerful presence she had ever encountered. The journey to the Apache rancheria was a blur of misery. Miranda was tired at first, but the bonds were rough, and the jolting ride made her ill. After she was sick over the side of the horse, Garrick, with a sigh of what seemed like impatience, cut her hands free. He didn't speak to her. He didn't look at her. He just gestured for her to hold on. And she did, her arms wrapped around a man who was, by all definitions, her mortal enemy. They rode for hours, up into the high rocky canyons that the U.S. Army maps marked as uninhabited. The maps were wrong. The camp was hidden in a box canyon, naturally fortified and supplied by a small, clear spring. It was not the collection of crude huts she imagined. It was a community, bustling with activity. Women tanned hides, children played loud, laughing games, and old men sat smoking, their eyes following her with open, unnerving curiosity. She was an object, a trophy. Garrick dismounted, pulling her down after him. He spoke in his language, guttural, sharp, and commanding. A few of the warriors who had ridden with him laughed. One of them, a man with a scarred face and cruel eyes, reached out to touch her blonde hair. Garrick's hand shot out, catching the man's wrist. He didn't raise his voice, but the words he spoke cut through the camp's noise like a knife. The warrior, Rico, snatched his hand back as if burned, his face darkening with hatred. It was a hatred directed not just at Garrick, but at her. Garrick pushed her forward, toward an older woman who was grinding corn on a flat stone. The woman's face was a road map of grief. She looked at Miranda with dead eyes. Garrick spoke to her, his voice softer now. The woman, whose name Miranda would learn was Iris, nodded once. Miranda was now Iris's property. A slave, the first week was a living hell. Iris, whose son had been killed by soldiers like Thornton weeks earlier, took out her sorrow on Miranda. She was given the worst tasks, scraping animal hides until her hands were raw and bleeding, hauling heavy buckets of water from the spring, and tending the smoky, acrid fires. She was given scraps to eat and a thin, filthy blanket to sleep on in a small lean-to, exposed to the cold mountain nights. The children, at first curious, became cruel. They threw pebbles at her, called her ghost skin. Rico, the warrior Garrick had admonished, made a point of walking past her, spitting at her feet. He seemed to be challenging his chief, testing how much he would protect his pet. Garrick, for his part, ignored her completely. He was the war chief, a man burdened by leadership. He held councils, organized hunts, and sent out scouts. He was a whirlwind of purpose. Miranda was beneath his notice, a piece of property assigned to a grieving widow. Miranda's grief for her father was a cold, hard stone in her stomach. At night, huddled under the blanket, she would weep silently. She prayed, but her prayers felt like they were bouncing off the canyon walls. Her faith, the very bedrock of her life, was cracking. One evening, after hauling a particularly heavy load of firewood, her exhausted arms gave out. She dropped the wood which scattered across the dirt. Iris, enraged, grabbed a thick branch and raised it to strike. Miranda, expecting the blow, flinched but did not cower. She looked Iris in the eye, her own gaze filled with a despair so deep it mirrored the widow's. "He is gone," Miranda whispered, her voice rough. "My father. He's gone, just like your son. We are the same." Iris froze, the stick held high. The camp went silent. To speak of the dead so, especially to compare a white man to an Apache warrior, was a profound taboo. Miranda pointed to her own heart. "It is broken, like yours." Iris's face contorted. The rage and the grief fought a visible battle. Finally, she lowered the stick, shaking. She spat at Miranda's feet and stalked away, but she did not strike. It was not acceptance. It was not kindness. But it was the first time she had been seen as something other than an animal or a prize. From the rocks above, watching the entire exchange, Garrick sat very still. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes never left the white woman who had just, against all odds, survived her first real test. Life settled into a brutal, monotonous routine. Miranda learned to be invisible. She learned to work until her muscles screamed, and then work more. She learned to anticipate Iris's needs, to grind the corn finer, to stack the wood neater. The physical labor, she found, was a strange blessing. It kept her mind from dwelling on the image of her father falling, his eyes wide with surprise. Iris's coldness remained, but the raw violence had faded. Miranda was no longer struck. She was simply and profoundly ignored. The change came with the fever. A young boy in the camp, the son of a warrior named Kyle, fell ill. It started as a cough and rapidly descended into a raging fever. The camp's medicine man, an old man named Huato, Miranda only knew his Western-given name, Henry, performed his rituals. He chanted. He used his sacred rattles, and he painted symbols on the boy's chest. But the fever only worsened. The boy, Leo, was delirious. Miranda, watching from a distance, felt a cold dread. She recognized the sickness. Back in Ohio, an outbreak of lung fever, pneumonia, the doctors called it, had swept through her parish. She had sat with the dying, including her own aunt. She knew the signs. She also knew what, sometimes, helped. She saw Leo's mother, Leona, weeping outside the dwelling. Miranda's heart ached. She knew the helplessness. That night, Leo began to gasp, his breathing shallow and ragged. Henry the medicine man looked defeated. He told Cale and Leona to prepare for the end. Miranda couldn't stand it. This had nothing to do with race or revenge. It was a child. She moved, slipping past the guards. She went to the spring, soaking a clean rag in the icy water. Then she walked to the creek bed, where she had seen willow trees growing. She stripped handfuls of the bark, her hands fumbling in the dark. When she walked toward Kyle's dwelling, a hand gripped her arm. It was Rico. "The White Witch!" he hissed, his hand like a vice. "You will not bring your bad medicine here." "He's dying," Miranda pleaded, her voice desperate. "This will help. The fever. This will break the fever." "Lies!" Rico began to drag her away. "Let her go." The voice was quiet, but it stopped everyone. Garrick emerged from the shadows. He looked not at Miranda, but at Rico. She cannot harm him more than the fever has. Rico released her, his face a mask of fury. "You let this thing defy our ways?" "I let a mother try to save her son," Garrick said, nodding to Leona, who was watching with desperate hope. "Go. Do what you can." Miranda rushed inside. She ignored the glares, the whispers. She bathed Leo's burning forehead with the cold cloth. She crushed the willow bark and mixed it with hot water, forcing the bitter tea past the boy's cracked lips. She sat with him, holding his small hand, whispering prayers that were half scripture, half hymn. She sat for 2 days and 2 nights. Iris silently brought her a bowl of broth. Leona never left her side. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Leo woke, his eyes clear, and asked for water. The camp was stunned. Leona wept, this time with joy, and embraced Miranda in a fierce, tight hug. Kyle, the boy's father, came to her and placed his hand over his heart, a gesture of profound, silent thanks. Miranda had saved the boy. That evening, Garrick found her by the spring, washing the grime of the sick room from her face. She tensed, expecting. She didn't know what. "You have strong medicine," he said. Miranda turned. It was the first time he had truly spoken to her. His English was perfect, almost without accent. It startled her. "It is not medicine," she said, her voice tired. "It is just knowledge. Willow bark for fever. Cold water." "Knowledge," he repeated, tasting the word. "My mother was at the San Carlos mission. She learned your words. She learned your sicknesses. They killed her." The statement hung in the air, a terrible, simple fact. "I am sorry," Miranda said. "Why?" he asked, his gaze intense, pinning her to the spot. "Why did you help him? He is the son of your enemy." Miranda looked at her hands, still red and raw. "My father taught me that every life is sacred. I think I had forgotten that. Until I saw Leo. I didn't do it for you, or for them. I did it for him, and for my father." Garrick watched her, the stoic mask of the war chief firmly in place. But his eyes were full of a deep, ancient sorrow she recognized. He was a man holding his world together with sheer force of will. "You are a strange woman, Miranda Blake," he said, using her full name. "You have the courage of a warrior, but the heart of something else." He turned and walked away, leaving her by the water, more confused and more terrifyingly, dangerously, seen than she had ever been in her life. 2 weeks passed. Miranda's status in the camp had shifted. She was no longer a slave. Iris had moved her into her own dwelling, giving her a new, clean blanket. The cruelty from the children stopped. The other women, while still wary, now nodded to her. Leona and Kyle treated her as family, sharing their food and offering her small gifts, a string of polished beads, a well-made moccasin. Rico, however, watched her with boiling hatred. He saw her influence as a poison. He saw Garrick's fleeting, thoughtful glances in her direction. He saw a leader being weakened. But the real threat was not inside the camp. It was miles away, at Fort McDowell, where Lieutenant Miles Thornton was building an army. Thornton had not told the truth about the ambush. In his official report, the wagon train had been beset by a massive, bloodthirsty war party, led by the infamous Garrick. He, Thornton, had fought bravely, but his small command was overwhelmed. Pastor Robert Blake had been murdered in cold blood, and his gentle, God-fearing daughter Miranda had been abducted for unspeakable purposes. The territorial newspapers ran the story. Savage brutes steal pastor's daughter. Public outrage was immediate and overwhelming. Thornton, far from being disciplined for losing his command, was hailed as a tragic hero. He was given a new, larger company of cavalry and trackers with one mission: hunt down Garrick and rescue Miranda Blake. But this was not a rescue mission. It was an obsession. In his tent, Miles Thornton kept a small, tin-type photograph of Miranda, one she had given him during his failed courtship. He would stare at it for hours. She had refused him. She, a simple pastor's daughter, had refused him, a man of breeding, a man with a future. He imagined her in the Apache camp. He imagined her soiled, defiled. The thought didn't fill him with pity. It filled him with a white-hot, possessive rage. She was his to save. She was his to reclaim. He wasn't saving her from Garrick. He was taking her back. The fact that she was with the war chief, the man who had humiliated him, was a personal insult that went deeper than any military defeat. "We will wipe that rancheria from the earth, men," he told his troops, his voice shaking with zeal. "We will not leave one stone upon another. We are bringing civilization and justice to this land. We are saving Miss Blake." His trackers, 2 men named Finn and Lomax, were good. They were relentless, and they had found the trail. News of the army's movement reached Garrick's camp via a scout. The atmosphere changed instantly. The quiet industry of the community was replaced by the tense, frantic energy of a people preparing for war. Garrick called a council. Miranda, to her shock, was summoned. She stood at the edge of the circle of warriors, Cale at her side. "They come," Garrick announced, his voice flat. "The soldier chief, the one from the wagons. He leads them." Miranda's blood ran cold. "Thornton," Garrick nodded. "He hunts you." "He hunts you," Miranda corrected. He does not care about me. He only cares about his pride. He caused the attack. He shot at your peace delegates." The warriors murmured. Rico shot her a venomous look. "She lies to protect her own kind." "She speaks the truth," Garrick said, silencing him. "My scouts saw the first shot. It came from the soldiers." He turned back to Miranda. "But it is you he uses as an excuse. The papers in the town cry out for your rescue. He is bringing an army." Miranda's mind raced. She knew Miles Thornton. She knew his arrogance, his vanity, and his terrible cold ambition. "He's not just ambitious," she said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it had. "He is obsessive. He proposed to me back east. I refused him. This is not about justice. This is about his wounded pride. He will not be clever. He will be angry. He will come fast, and he will come straight." Garrick's eyes narrowed. This was new information. This was a why. "He wants to be a hero," Miranda continued. "But more than that, he wants to possess what he believes is his. He thinks I am a thing to be owned, just as you did." The last words were quiet, but they struck Garrick with the force of a physical blow. He stared at her, the mask of the war chief cracking for a brief second, revealing the man beneath. He had seen her as a prize. Now he was being hunted by another man who saw her the same way. The twist was complete. She was not a pawn in a war between two cultures. She was the prize in a deadly, personal feud between two proud, powerful men. The camp was in a state of controlled panic. The warriors were preparing for a fight they knew they couldn't win. Thornton's force was too large, too well armed. Garrick's only advantage was the terrain, but that would only buy them time. Miranda watched as Garrick stood over a crude map drawn in the dirt, plotting the defense. His lieutenants, Kyle, and a few other seasoned warriors looked grim. Their strategy was one of pure, desperate defense, a glorious, bloody end. Rico was arguing for an immediate, preemptive strike. "We hit them in the pass. We die like men." "And what of the women?" Kyle shot back. "The children. Your plan is for your own glory, Rico, not for the people." Garrick remained silent, his face carved from stone. He was trapped. He was a war chief, and his only solution was war. Later that night, Miranda approached him. He was alone, staring at the map, though the lines were long since obscured by shadow. "You're planning to die," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't look up. "It is a good day to die." "No," she said, kneeling beside him. "It is a good day to live. My father, he was a man of peace, but he was not weak. He was a botanist. He studied this land. He taught me." Garrick finally looked at her, his eyes questioning. "You see this canyon?" she said, pointing to the map. "You plan to fight here, at the mouth. Thornton will expect that. He wants that. He wants a glorious battle to put in his report." "It is the only defensible position," Garrick said. "It is a trap," Miranda insisted. "For you. He will pin you here and send men over the ridges. He will slaughter you." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "You think like a warrior. You must start to think like a survivor." She grabbed a stick and drew in the dirt, modifying his map. "Your scouts? Did you steal any of their supplies? Their maps?" Garrick nodded, impressed despite himself. "We took a pack from a patrol last month." "Bring it." He returned moments later with a cracked leather satchel. Inside were U.S. Geological Survey maps. Miranda unrolled them, her fingers tracing the contour lines. She had studied her father's maps for years. "Here," she said, her finger landing on a spot miles west of the camp. "He will come this way, through the main pass. But this is a dry riverbed. The maps call it a dead end. But look, my father and I, we followed it. It's not a dead end, it's a switchback. It goes up, behind this ridge. It's a narrow path, barely wide enough for a person, but it leads to the high plateau." Garrick's eyes widened. He knew the area, but had dismissed the path as useless. "You can't fight Thornton's army," Miranda said, her voice intense. "You can't. But you can humiliate him. You can save your people. How? A feint. You leave a small force here, led by Kale, just enough to make him think he has you trapped. But you take the women, the children, the old ones, and you go this way. You take them to the plateau. By the time Thornton realizes he's been fighting a ghost, your people will be gone." This was her first salvation, a practical, strategic escape. But the second was more profound. Garrick was looking at her, his face full of a turmoil she had never seen. "You would save us?" he asked, his voice low. "After I took you? After my people? After you lost everything?" "My God teaches mercy," Miranda said, her voice thick with emotion. "And your people have taught me how to survive. Perhaps they are the same thing. I will not let that arrogant fool murder any more innocent people. Not yours. Not mine." He was a man of violence and rage, a leader cornered by a world that wanted him extinct. And this woman, this captive, had just offered him a path that was not about a good death, but about a future. She had saved him from his own warrior's pride. "Your salvation is a dangerous thing, Miranda Blake," he murmured. "So is your pride, Garrick," she replied. He stared at the map, then at her. He nodded once. The decision was made. He would trust the white woman. He would trust his forbidden salvation. The plan was set. The air in the camp, already thin with altitude, grew thick with a new, suffocating tension. Garrick gathered his core warriors, not in a formal council, but in a tight, grim circle near the central fire pit. The families, watching from a distance, packed in a dreadful silence, every scrape of a pot or muffle of a child's cry sounding unnaturally loud. Garrick spoke in a low, level voice, outlining Miranda's strategy. He laid out the logic of the feint, the treachery of the switchback path, and the absolute necessity of saving the people over winning a fight. As he spoke, Miranda, standing just outside the circle, could feel the pressure build. This was her plan. A plan of retreat, a plan of cunning, not of pure strength, and she could see how it grated on some of the younger men. Before Garrick could even finish, Rico stepped forward, his face a mask of contempt. "Flee!" he spat, the word a poisoned dart aimed at his chief. "We are Ndi. We are the people. We do not flee like rabbits, scattering into the rocks." He turned his burning gaze from Garrick and jabbed a finger directly at Miranda. "We do not flee because a white snake whispers poison into our chief's ear." The camp went dead silent. This was more than disagreement. This was a public, direct challenge to Garrick's leadership and to his honor. "She has bewitched him!" Rico's voice rose to a roar, playing on the camp's fear and superstition. "First she poisons our children with her white medicine," he said, gesturing toward a healthy Leo. "And now she poisons our chief with her white cowardice. She makes us weak. She will lead us into that dry riverbed, and her soldier chief will be waiting. It is a trap." Kyle stepped forward, his body a solid block of loyalty. "It is not cowardice to save our children, Rico. It is wisdom. The wisdom of a chief." "It is the wisdom of a white woman," Rico shrieked, his humiliation from their last encounter, his jealousy, and his warrior's pride all boiling over into a single, explosive point of rage. "She has poisoned our ways. I will cleanse this camp. I will cut the snake's head off myself." He moved, not in a lunge, but in a blur. His knife, a long, ugly blade, was in his hand and slicing through the air toward Miranda before she could even register the threat. She didn't flinch. She simply froze, her life suspended in that sliver of a second. Rico never reached her. Garrick's speed was a different order of reality. He was not a man. He was a force. He didn't intercept the knife. He moved inside it, deflecting Rico's arm with his shoulder and striking him once. It was not a wild punch, but a single, hard, calculated blow to the jaw that landed with a sickening crack. Rico crumpled, not unconscious but stunned, his knife skittering across the stones. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the mountains, more complete than the darkness in a cave. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Garrick stood over his fallen warrior, his chest heaving, his face a terrible, impassive mask. He had not just struck a warrior, he had struck down a dissenter in a time of war, in front of the entire tribe. He had violently, publicly, and irrevocably, chosen the white captive over one of his own. "Get up!" Garrick commanded. His voice was quiet, but it held the cold, deadly authority of a landslide. Rico staggered to his feet, a dark line of blood dripping from his mouth. His eyes, fixed on Garrick, were no longer just angry. They were murderous, filled with a bottomless, humiliated rage. Garrick stared him down. "You will lead the rear guard." Rico's head snapped up. It was a brilliant, terrible order. It was not a pardon. It was a test. A suicide mission. "You will take 20 men. With Kyle," Garrick continued, his voice cutting. "You will hold the canyon. You will make the soldiers believe we are all there. You will fight for the people, and you will buy us the time we need, or you will be cast out, here and now, to face the soldiers alone." He held out his hand. "Your choice, warrior." Rico's gaze flickered from Garrick to Miranda. She could feel the heat of his hatred, a physical force. He saw her as the architect of his dishonor. Slowly, deliberately, he wiped the blood from his chin with the back of his hand. He looked at Kyle, who nodded once, his face grim. Rico did not speak. He bent, retrieved his knife, and sheathed it. Then he turned and stalked away to gather his men. The challenge was over. The loyalty for now was forced. But the hatred remained, now a cold, focused thing, waiting for its moment. The camp dissolved into a state of controlled chaos. Valuables were buried, supplies were packed into tight bundles, and the dwellings were prepared to be burned. This was the end of this place, the death of their home. As dusk began to bleed purple into the canyons, and the first scouts returned with the terrifying news Thornton would be upon them by morning, Garrick found Miranda. She was helping Iris pack dried herbs, her hands moving with a mechanical, numb efficiency. He stood before her, the leader of a people on the brink of annihilation. He held the reins of 2 horses. "It is time," he said, his voice low and rough from the confrontation. He looked at her, his face impossible to read in the dying light. "You have a choice. The path you found. I will lead my people on it. It is our only chance. You can come with us." He paused, and she could see the cost of his next words. "Or, you can take this horse." He held out the reins of the second animal. "Ride east, hard and fast. Do not stop. You will meet Thornton's patrol. You will be safe. You will be with your savior." Miranda was stunned into silence. He was letting her go. After everything, he was giving her back the agency he had stolen. "You are not a slave, Miranda Blake," he said, answering her unasked question. "You never truly were. You have earned your path." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "But I warn you, this man, Thornton, when he finds you, he will not see the woman who helped my people survive. He will only see a woman who was with my people. He will see you as soiled, as his. His." That one word struck her harder than Rico's fist. Miranda looked at the horse he offered. It was a path back to her old world, to civilization, to clean sheets and churches and scripture, and to Lieutenant Miles Thornton. She saw his face, his cold, pale eyes during his failed courtship. She saw his arrogance as he rode ahead of the wagon. And she saw, with a clarity that choked her, her father falling, his eyes wide with surprise, a bullet from a soldier's gun in his chest. Thornton was not a savior. He was a monster wearing the uniform of her people. She then looked past Garrick into the bustle of the dying camp. She saw Iris, who had once beaten her, now watching her, her old, hard face filled not with warmth, but with a grudging, fierce respect. She saw Leona strapping the boy, Leo, her boy, to her back for the climb. Leona caught her eye and nodded, a simple, profound acknowledgement. She turned back to Garrick, the war chief who had captured her, who had ignored her, who had been forced to see her, and who was now trusting her with the lives of every person he had left. "I know what Lieutenant Thornton sees," she said, her voice firm, clear as a desert spring. "He sees a possession, a thing to be reclaimed or to be punished." She met his gaze, and for the first time she did not look away. When you look at me, you see a person." She pushed the horse's reins, the ones meant for her escape, back into his hand. "My place is with the people," she said. "I will help you lead them to the plateau." A flicker of something, relief, wonder, perhaps even fear, crossed Garrick's face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the stoic mask of the chief. He nodded once, a sharp, final gesture. "Then ride with me." Miranda Blake, daughter of Pastor Robert Blake, turned from the horse of her past. She mounted the one that would take her into the unknown, and she took her place beside the Apache war chief. She was no longer a captive, no longer a slave, no longer a prize. She was a defender. The first light of dawn was a liar, promising a cool, gentle start to the day. Instead, it was the signal for hell to be unleashed. Just as Miranda had foretold, Lieutenant Miles Thornton didn't bother with tactics or caution. Fueled by a night of simmering rage and the arrogant certainty of his righteousness, he ordered a full, blind cavalry charge directly into the mouth of the canyon. "Saber high, men, no quarter, for God and for Miranda." His voice, sharp and zealous, echoed off the canyon walls. The charge was met with a deafening, staggered volley of fire. Kyle and Rico, with their 20 hand-picked warriors, were dug into the rocks, invisible. They operated not as a single line, but as a series of small, mobile cells. They fired, then vanished, reappearing 50 yards away to fire again. The canyon amplified the sound, and the disciplined, sporadic gunfire made Thornton's men believe they were facing a force of 100, not 20. Horses screamed and fell, men cried out in confusion, and the charge dissolved into a panicked, disorganized firefight. "They're dug in!" Thornton bellowed, his face a mask of fury as he was forced to dismount. "Return fire! Pin them! I want them all!" He was so consumed by the fight in front of him, so desperate for the glorious victory he had promised his superiors, that he failed to notice the profound, unnatural silence of the canyon behind him. Miles away and thousands of feet higher, that silence was a suffocating blanket. The only sounds were the scrape of moccasins on loose scree, the ragged, desperate breathing of the elderly, and the occasionally muffled whimper of a child. Miranda's lungs burned in the thin mountain air. She had Leona's young son, Leo, strapped to her own back, his small body a warm, trusting weight. Her free hand was linked with Iris's, and she half pulled, half supported the old woman over the treacherous, narrow switchback. Every distant crack of a rifle from the battle below felt like a lash on her back. She flinched with each volley, her mind screaming for Cale, for Rico, for the men who were buying them this time with their lives. She looked back at the long, slow, vulnerable line of people. This was it, the entire future of a tribe, balanced on a knife edge of rock, and she, the white woman, was leading the way. The irony was so bitter it tasted like ash in her dry mouth. Back in the canyon, the battle abruptly ceased as the gunfire from the rocks simply stopped. Thornton, his ears ringing, advanced cautiously. He found the rancheria, but it was a ghost town, the dwellings already burning, the coals of the cook fires scattered. "They're running!" he roared. "They're deeper in the canyon! After them!" It was then that Finn, his grizzled tracker, knelt and pressed his hand to the dirt, not looking into the canyon, but at the cliffs beside them. "Lieutenant." His voice was low, uneasy. "The tracks are thin here. The main party. They didn't go deep. They went up." Finn pointed to the barely visible switchback path, a scar on the face of the ridge. "And I'm seeing boot prints, sir. Small ones, mixed in with the rest." Thornton's blood went cold. He stalked over, his eyes tracing the path up toward the sky. Boot prints, her boot prints. It wasn't a retreat, it was a deception. She had done this. She wasn't a terrified captive awaiting rescue. She was an accomplice. She was with him. The public image of the violated Miranda Blake dissolved, replaced by the woman who had refused him in Ohio. The woman who had, once again, chosen another, this time a savage, over him. His obsession, already a raging fire, exploded into a supernova of personal mania. This was no longer a military operation. It was an execution. "She's with him," he whispered, his voice shaking. He spun on his heel, his face purple. "You 10!" he barked at his personal guard, his most loyal men. "With me. We're going after the girl. The rest of you, secure this hovel. Burn what's left." He didn't wait for a reply, sprinting toward the path, his saber still in his hand. Garrick's party was just cresting the final ridge, the wide, flat safety of the plateau only 100 yards away. They were exhausted, slow, and completely exposed. Then he heard it. Not the rattle of gunfire, but the sound he had dreaded most, the clang of military boots on stone from far below. They were being followed. He had hoped for more time. He cursed his own optimism. "Miranda!" His voice was a whip crack. She turned, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. He pointed to the plateau. "Get them to the top. Do not stop. Do not look back. Keep them moving." "Where are you going?" she cried, her hand tightening on Iris's arm. "To buy you that time," he said, his face a grim mask. He turned to the 5 warriors who had acted as the rear guard for the climbing party. They were his best. They needed no orders. They simply drew their knives, checked their hatchets, and turned to follow him back down. Miranda watched him go, her heart seizing. "Go," he bellowed at her, not looking back. "Live." It was the same word her father had spoken. She choked back a sob, turned, and dragged Iris the last few feet. "Move! Everyone, move!" On the path, the 2 forces met. It was not a battle, it was a brawl. On the narrow ledge, rifles were useless. It was a desperate, primitive clash of steel, bone, and desperation, fought over a sheer, 1,000-foot drop. The air was filled with the grunts of men, the wet sound of knives finding homes, and the occasional terrible scream as a man, soldier or warrior, was thrown from the path to be swallowed by the canyon. Miranda got the last of the children onto the plateau. Iris, safe, gripped her arm. "He comes," the old woman said, pointing. Miranda looked back. The fight below was a chaotic knot of bodies. She saw Garrick, a whirlwind of focused, deadly motion. But she also saw Thornton, his blue uniform now dark with blood, his and others', his face contorted in a mask of pure madness. He was fighting not like a soldier, but like a demon, his saber slashing wildly, his men falling around him. It came down to 2. Garrick and Thornton, alone on the path, separated by the bodies of their men. "Savage!" Thornton screamed, his voice cracking. "After all this you die, and she will be mine." "She belongs to no one," Garrick roared back, lunging, his hunting knife flashing. Thornton was trained by West Point, but Garrick was forged by the mountains. The saber was long, but the knife was fast. Thornton slashed, cutting Garrick's arm. Garrick ignored the pain, ducked inside the saber's arc, and slammed his body into Thornton's, using his momentum to pin him against the cliff wall. Garrick's knife hand came up, but Thornton, anticipating the move, released his saber and, in the same motion, drew his navy sidearm from its holster. He jammed the barrel into Garrick's chest. It was over. Garrick froze. He saw the cold, black eye of the revolver, the white-knuckled finger on the trigger, the triumphant, insane glitter in Thornton's eyes. "It ends here," Thornton hissed, savoring the moment. From the ridge above, watching it all, Miranda's mind, her world, her very soul, tore open. "No!" Her scream was primal, an animal sound of pure loss echoing across the vast, empty space. A sound split the air. Not the cannon-like boom of the revolver, but a sharp, venomous hiss. Thornton froze. His finger, already tightening on the trigger, went slack. A look of profound, almost comical, confusion spread across his face. He looked down. A long, feathered arrow was protruding from his chest, driven so deep the stone point had emerged from his back, pinning him to the rock face. He looked up, his eyes meeting Garrick's, his mouth opening as if to ask a question. He made a small, gurgling sound, and then slid down the rock wall, his eyes open and empty. Dead. Garrick, breathing heavily, stared at the body of his enemy, his mind struggling to catch up. He looked up at Miranda, who was staring, her hand clamped over her mouth. Then, together, they both looked across the small chasm. On an opposite crag, standing alone like an avenging spirit, was Rico. His bow was still half raised. He had not followed Cale to the rendezvous. He had mistrusted the plan. He had mistrusted her. He had doubled back, tracking Thornton's party, expecting a second trap, a betrayal. He had arrived just in time to see the soldier chief, the man who had caused all this, about to murder his war chief. His hatred for Miranda was afire, but his loyalty to his people and his warrior's code was a mountain. He could not, would not, let an enemy soldier strike the killing blow. Rico and Garrick locked eyes across the distance. 100 words passed between them in that single, silent look. A challenge, a reckoning, and a complex, bitter understanding. Rico looked up at Miranda, his face unreadable. "The people are safe," he called out, his voice hoarse, letting Garrick know the rear guard had also escaped. He then nodded, once, at his chief. "Your magic worked, Chief." He did not wait for a reply. He gave one last look at Miranda, a look that was no longer pure hatred, but a dark, troubled confusion. Then he turned and vanished into the rocks. He had saved the man, but he could not yet join the new world that woman represented. Garrick, his body screaming with pain and exhaustion, climbed the last few feet of the path. He hauled himself over the edge and onto the plateau. He stood before Miranda, his chest heaving, his arm bleeding freely, his knife still slick with blood. She didn't weep. She didn't run to him. She didn't flinch from the violence that clung to him. She stood her ground, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, and she met his gaze as an equal. She reached out, not in comfort, but in solidarity, and gripped his uninjured arm, her knuckles white, her grip as strong as a man's. "It is done," she said, her voice a low rasp. Garrick looked at his people, a huddled, terrified but living group, and then back at her. "It is finished." Miranda Blake let go of his arm and turned to look out over the vast, empty plateau. Her past was a smoking ruin in a canyon far below. Her father, her faith, her entire world, all of it was gone, burned away. She had been captured, enslaved, and had become the pivot point for a war. But as she stood beside the Apache war chief, breathing in the clean, cold air of her new, harsh home, she realized she was not, and had never been, a captive. She was, in the most terrifying and truest sense of the word, finally free. They say the high desert doesn't keep secrets, but it does. The story of Lieutenant Miles Thornton's lost command was recorded as a tragic military defeat. But the truth survived in the oral history of Garrick's people, the story of the ghost-skin woman who brought them a new kind of strategy, one born of mercy and survival. Miranda Blake was never rescued. She never returned to the white world. She lived out her days with the people who had claimed her, and who she, in turn, had claimed as her own. She taught the children to read, but she also learned their stories, their herbs, and their ways. She and Garrick, two leaders from two different worlds, forged a forbidden, unspoken bond, proving that salvation doesn't always come from a church. Sometimes it comes from the last person you ever expected, in the last place you ever thought to find it. What do you think of Miranda's ultimate choice? Was it an act of betrayal, or the ultimate act of finding herself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes these stories come alive. And if you were on the edge of your seat, please like this video, share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life dramas every single week.